Record 'em.
Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, everybody, thank you for coming back to share our weekly video chat with author Kevin McAleer. Kevin McAleer has a new book out called LA Kid. It's excellent. I'm 3/4 of the way through it. Excellent, excellent book. I have my objections for the profane elements because I try to keep a Catholic moral stance on things, but the writing, as always, is engaging and well done. And he's one of the better authors of our time.
Oh, Tim.
As long as you temper the R-rated material, in my opinion, but I know most people don't mind that. So,
well, thanks. You are giving me your opinion of the book for the first time in a public venue, as it were. So thanks. I didn't know what you thought about it. So thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate it.
And one of these days we can do a discussion of it if you'd like. I have some plans for upcoming weeks, but we could drop this in and talk about it. I just very briefly, I remember a few years ago you sending me the initial draft of this book, and I did some editing on that, and it's very similar to that first draft. You didn't change too much.
No, I didn't. And yeah, that's very kind of you to mention my book. Thanks for the free publicity, Tim. I appreciate it. Maybe we can end this section, though, by just having me say that, you did whatever you liked about the book. You may have had a hand in. I don't know. I forget. It's so long ago. But I didn't change much. That's true. So had you urged me to change certain passages, I think I probably took that advice on board, but then not to heart necessarily.
Sure. But
there you have it. We're completely transparent. Our writer-editor relationship here, folks.
Yeah. I make my suggestions, and you take a few of them here and there. I noticed a couple of my suggestions had come through on this book.
Okay.
We could talk about that specifically when we have an hour on that book.
Yeah, let's save it for that time when we block out an hour for the book LA Kid. So yeah,
wonderful.
The advanced publicity.
All right.
Okay.
But today, what we're doing today is we have already surveyed the 7 novels of Raymond Chandler, and we had a general session on Raymond Chandler. So now what we are doing today is the screenplay of Double Indemnity that Chandler wrote with Billy Wilder. And Kevin has even gone further to read the original novel, Double Indemnity, to compare with the screenplay version. And Kevin had a good screenplay version online, which was the original script as sent to the studio by Chandler and Billy Wilder. So I didn't access that. I used the one from this book, Double Indemnity. So it was kind of a slicker production than the one you got with all the markups in the margins and whatnot, and typeface, regular typeface on the script you read. You can get that online.
Yes.
So Kevin, how would you like to start this session? Would you like to talk about the screenplay or the original novel or something else in regards to Double Indemnity, the film itself?
Okay, why don't we, for a change of pace, just give the viewers a really rough outline of what the story is about in case they don't know. I would be surprised if most of the people who might tune in don't have some idea about the story, either having read the short novel by James M. Cain, first published in 1935 in Liberty Magazine in a serial, and it came out in 1943 in book form. I think it was entitled 3 of a Kind, and there were 3 stories in that, and one of them was Double Indemnity. Or they have seen the movie, which is a classic of film noir, and many people argue that it is the first really through and through film noir. Other people speak about Maltese Falcon, okay, but we can maybe start there. What is film noir? I think film noir is simply, it's the slow and maybe sometimes accelerate in the case of Cain, because he wrote with such great pace. That's why I love him. And I reread this novel, by the way. I've read it several times, so this is maybe the third, fourth, fifth read. I can't get enough of Cain. I think he's a wonderful writer. And film noir is basically the slow slide into complete degradation and no way out of your destiny. And that's why I love it. It's man's fate writ large, right? We're all going to end badly, as it were. You know, we're not going to live forever, let alone happily ever after. And that's why I like film noir. It sort of encapsulates the human condition for me. And yeah, they oftentimes take place in Los Angeles. There's no exception. Why would they take place in Los Angeles? Well, you had a lot of great writers living in Los Angeles who are writing film noir-esque stories. Raymond Chandler, I think people who've viewed any of our podcasts the past few weeks will know about that one. And we're introducing James M. Cain now, crossed with Raymond Chandler, and Billy Wilder putting his own inimitable stamp. I think you can kind of see it there, poking through the Chandler prose here and there. But film noir, it's where things end badly, and they are supposed to end badly, okay? That's the fun of it, as it were. And often they are told in flashback. So this Double Indemnity has set sort of a precedent for film noir, because the story is told in flashback. And it starts out with a fellow named Walter Neff. We're going to keep the film names. They changed some of the names from the novel, but we'll keep with the film names. And I'm going to be talking about the film here. Walter Neff, he's an insurance salesman, and he stops by a house one fine day. It's in the Los Feliz district, if anyone's familiar with LA. Franklin Avenue runs right through the heart of it. It's kind of North Hollywood, goes up into the Hollywood Hills there. Very nice place. He stops by in this Los Feliz district, a house where he wants to renew some guy's auto insurance. And this guy's name is, I don't know his first name, I forget it, but Mr. Dietrichson, like Marlena Dietrich, but then son on the end, Dietrichson. And he's not there, but the wife is, Phyllis Dietrichson, and she comes into the scene. She's at the top of the stairs, and you can tell where Chandler is doing the writing here. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilder, you did a great job in the film, but I can tell Chandler. We've been studying him for the past 7 to 8 weeks. You can see Chandler, he's got his fingerprints all over this. All right, and this woman comes to the top she's on the landing at the top of the stairs, and this Neff fellow's down at the bottom of the stairs, and she comes out in a towel. Right, she's been sunbathing in the backyard. And it's Barbara Stanwyck. So, cha-cha, right? Here we go. And she gives him kind of a sultry look. And then here's Chandler describing it. After he leaves the home, we'll get to what transpires between the two of them. But he said, I was thinking about that dame upstairs and the way she had looked at me. And I wanted to see her again, close, without that silly staircase between us. That's Chandler. Chandler wrote that line. And there's another thing. Billy Wilder, we sometimes forget, because his films have such great American vernacular. But he came from Vienna originally, via Berlin, via Paris. And, Hitler, he was Jewish. And so he left the continent in 1933 when he was still a relatively young man. So he had only been in 1943, when he sat down to write this script with Chandler, he'd only been in America for 10 years. And his English was good, solid, but shaky, I would imagine. And that's why he always, till the very end of his career, he always worked with another screenwriter. He liked that. He liked the dynamic, probably could, bounce things off each other. But I think it was also because his English, and I know this as someone who, I speak fluent German and I've lived here for 30 years, but I still make mistakes. And I'm still not a pro when it comes to the slang and the vernacular. No way. And Mr. Wilder, arguably a much more gifted man linguistically and artistically, perhaps, than myself. But yeah, I could imagine how he always wanted to work with a good American writer so he could get the words right, down on the page. He would have never written that line. That's Chandler, okay? There are other Chandlerisms that come up. For example, Neff is talking about, oh, it was just a hard chair to park your pants from 9 to 5. That's Chandler. Billy couldn't have come up with that. I would stake my life on it. Other lines like, wait a minute, Keys, I don't rate this beef. Some guy from Vienna, just 10 years in America, is going to write that line, right? So Chandler's all over the place, just to get that out of the way, right? And Billy Wilder, to his credit, he did give Chandler his due. But I'm thinking maybe 70 to 80% of the dialogue and the words on the page are Chandler. But then again, I think Mr. Wilder, he gave the story its cinematic structure. And that's very important because you got to tell a story quickly in an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes. And I think that was owing to Mr. Wilder. So hats off to him on that count. Not to shortchange him in any respect, but this is Chandler's writing, okay? I think. I don't know what you think, but that was my impression, especially the dialogue. So we're zigzagging all over the place. I wanted to tell the story. So this Neff comes in and he sees this seductress at the top of the stairs, and she changes, gets into something a little bit more decent. Neff is focused on this little anklet, gold anklet she has, sort of a wanton little piece of jewelry, right? Walking around with a little anklet, like a slave bracelet, Anyway, Chandler and Wilder make a big deal out of it in the script. And they get to talking, and at a certain point, she asks about accident insurance. And it becomes pretty clear to this Neff, because he's an old hand, he knows the ropes. He can smell, something fishy a mile away. And now it's sitting right in front of him. And this woman wants to get accident insurance on her husband, and she doesn't want him to know about it. Well, the problem of reading the novel after having read this script is that I'm getting them a little bit mixed up in my mind. I don't think yet. I'm still with the script, but I think after they have a very heavy flirtation, there's some very serious Chandler dialogue going on there too, where she says, "Hey, I think you're going a little bit fast. There's a speeding limit in this state, Mr. Neff," she says, although she's seducing him with her looks and her language. He starts to get a little bit ahead of himself, and they have a little back and forth about it's this metaphor of if I'm speeding, if I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm going too fast, then why don't you get off your motorcycle and ticket me, officer, he says to her. And she says, well, why don't I let you off with a warning? Why don't you give me a slap on the hand? They go back and forth like this. It's very Chandler-esque. Okay, he leaves the place though, thinking, I want no part of this. But then she shows up at his apartment like the next day or evening, and she says, I want to really do this. And it's unclear what exactly is happening, but maybe they kiss or they have something going on, but they start to fall for one another, it would appear. Neff is certainly smitten by her. And very soon, they concoct this scheme where they can knock off her husband at the same time as they get a big payoff on this accident insurance that Neff is going to get this Mr. Diedrichson to sign on to without him knowing it. And there's a clause in it, and here's where the title of the film and of the novel comes from. There's a double indemnity clause. It says, if you die on a train, you get double indemnity. And I think is in the movie, it's 50,000 and it's doubled to 100. Anyway, If
Well,
that's not the
Kevin, I think it's if you die falling off a train, to be specific.
No, it's not, because they're not thinking of anyone falling off a train with that clause. It's just a come on
Oh,
that the customer will say, "Oh, well, look at this. You know, we get a
oh,
100,000. My family will get 100,000 if I die on a train." What they're
oh,
implying is a train accident. You know, the train accidents did take place, but the
okay.
chances of that were so slim. You know, the actuarial tables, they figured it out that, you know, we could only, you know, win on this deal. So uh, anyway, Walter Neff and this Phyllis Dietrichson, they get together. They say somehow, it's described very nicely in the book in particular. It's also not done very badly in the film either. How they get this Mr. Dietrichson to sign this accident insurance without him knowing it. Phyllis has a key to their safe deposit box. She gets a hold of it from Neff, and she puts in the safe deposit box for after, when this guy's died, they can make a claim. Well, a lot of the film, up until about 2/3 of the film, in fact, almost an hour into the film, it's a film about an hour and 40 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. It's taken up with how they plan and then perpetrate the murder of this man. We maybe get into that later on, but it gets a little bit involved. I'm already talking too much. This is a big difference between the film and the book. The book gets the murder out of the way like in the first third, whereas it's 2/3 into the film. Because what Cain was mostly interested in, James M. Cain, the author of the source material, Double Indemnity, he was mostly interested in what he called the love rack. I don't really know what he meant by that, but you read it in interviews, the love rack. I presume he meant how whenever you fall in love, it brings its own miseries with it. You know, just the act of falling in love. There's going to be suffering involved. And here it's the love rack, like they're going to be torturing each other, like on the rack or something. I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but he used that phrase. Here's what happens then in the novel. They do, for the next 2/3, it's how these people, in fact, as soon as they commit the murder, they begin to hate each other. It's in the novel that way. In fact, when they're driving back from the train tracks where they deposit the body, having, you know, faked the train accident, it's too involved right here, maybe later. They get in a big argument. And in fact, they part. Phyllis is driving the car. Neff is sitting in the passenger seat. They part ways without kissing, without even saying goodbye. Okay? And in fact, Neff says, "I never wanted to see her again as long as I lived." This is just after having committed the murder and just having taken leave of her. And then a little bit later on, he said, "I loved her like a rabbit loves a rattlesnake." And this is the love rack. And this is what Cain concentrates on. He also does this in The Postman Always Rings Twice, where the murder is quickly done. And then it's how these two people, they are pulled apart from each other, and then how they maybe come back together or not, and how they maybe plan to kill each other, and all that. The drama comes after the murder. Most of the drama in this film comes in planning and then executing the murder. That's a big difference between the book and the novel, for starters.
Which do you prefer?
I prefer both of them. They're both wonderful. It's really a case here of, wow, it's hard to pick one or the other. Usually you can, right? You like the book better than the film, or vice versa. Usually depending which one you saw first or read first, right? It usually hinges on that. But I love both of them. It's hard to say. I will put it this way. If I had neither the film nor the book, I would prefer the book, because Cain does get involved in the nitty gritty of, yes, how the murder is executed, and how the insurance business is like a roulette wheel, and you're the croupier, and you're making a bet against the insuree, who's making a bet against you. He's betting that he's not going to die in a train accident, and you're betting or he's betting that he might die in a train accident. It's a good chance, and you can get the 100,000. And then I hope I'm citing the numbers right. 100,000 is what I think is in the film. Is that correct, Tim? I'm not sure, because in the book it's 25,000 and double that to 50,000 for the double indemnity. So I could be mixing them up a little bit here. But Cain, who worked in the insurance industry for a while, and whose father was in the insurance industry, he knew what he was talking about. And this is very interesting for me. And then all the legal ramifications as well. He also does this with The Postman Always Rings Twice. That's what I like. That's what you can't get in an hour and a half film. You just can't do it. So I would prefer that. And because I like this love rack aspect of it. As soon as they commit the murder, they start to pull apart. That's great. In the film, they don't do that. In fact, they part after the murder ways, and they both say, "I love you," right? So we're looking at something that they might pull off just by virtue of loving each other so much and really, playing it smart and informing one another of each other's moves and all the rest. But no, I like the Cain a little bit better for that reason, if I had to have one or the other, because it is really more film noir than the first film noir itself, because you just see it. You see it's going to end badly, and you're cheering for the hero, as it were, the anti-hero, Walter Neff, in a way, but at the same time, there's no way out. And in the film, they don't make that so very clear, right from the get-go, it seems.
How do you think that the casting of the film was done?
I thought it was great. I mean, everyone, even at the time, they were very skeptical of Fred McMurray in the role of a killer, right? And I was too, because I grew up with him as the father in My Three Sons, so, or the nutty professor, or the professor in Son of Flubber, or some Disney film. So it was hard to divorce him. But having watched the film, I didn't see it this time. I couldn't get it on YouTube. But having watched snippets that are available on YouTube, he does a fantastic job. I mean, I really think he does. He's very convincing, because he's not a killer. He's not a tough, streetwise kind of John Garfield guy who played, the anti-hero in The Postman Always Rings Twice with Lana Turner, 1946, for example, the other Cain book. But he pulls it off. I mean, with a lot of poignancy, I think, particularly in the final scenes. And and Barbara Stanwyck was superb. She's one of my favorite actresses anyway. And with that blonde wig, anyone else, it would have looked maybe ridiculous, because it's clearly this stupid blonde wig she's got on. But yeah, she pulls it off, man. She's evil, but she's not as evil as the woman in the book, by the way, who seems almost like a carbon copy. And here is again where we have, well, that wouldn't be Chandler's doing, because we're talking about the book now. But she is very similar to Mildred Haviland from Lady in the Lake, this nurse who kills people through her medical expertise. And this is another nurse, this Phyllis Diedrichson. She's a nurse who has killed the mother of her now stepdaughter. She has then subsequently married the husband of this woman she's killed, right? And now she has killed her husband, and now she's going to try and kill Walter Neff, it turns out, and almost does. She shoots him. That is also seen in the film. She ends up dead in the film, however. Good. I think I've thoroughly confused people, but yeah.
Okay, so who do you prefer as a writer, Chandler or Cain, and why?
Well, I prefer Chandler. Again, there's more poetry, and I'm figuring out how to go at this. Chandler despised Cain. He pretended to despise Cain, although there's a friendly letter he wrote to Cain about the film, But even in this friendly letter, there was he took a little jab at Cain when he was talking about how he and Wilder were trying to get Cain's dialogue into the script. And he said they were having a real tough time doing that because it just didn't read. In other words, it didn't seem believable. That's like not how people talk. And what he said was, it looked good on the page, but when spoken, it sounded stilted. It didn't sound like how someone would actually, speak in a certain situation. What he meant by that is, if you read Cain, this is very interesting, he almost never uses he said, she said, or any indication of who is speaking. I mean, it's clear, it's very clear from the context who's speaking, but he doesn't take any trouble to indicate. And he can get away with it because a lot of the dialogue is just one line, right? So you don't have like these long 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraph soliloquies, and then you go to the next person, you got to remind them who's talking now, right? It's always just one line, rat-a-tat, tat, 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 tat. So here it's Phyllis, here it's Walter, here it's Phyllis, here it's Walter. And Chandler said that looks great on the page, and it reads, if you're not reading it out loud, but when you put it into people's mouths, it doesn't quite wash. So he and Wilder had to fix that up, and the reason I like Chandler's prose and his stuff on the whole more than Cain is because there is very little joking around in Cain. There's very little wit. Why should there be? It's very serious themes. I mean, he goes at them in a much more serious way than Chandler does. Chandler's stuff is you stand back and admire it sometimes. What a great simile. Oh, that's just a beautiful poetic passage. For example, last page of The Big Sleep. But with Cain, you just want to turn the next page. It's unputdownable. I mean, the narrative thrust is supersonic, and that's why I love him. I mean, few writers can do that. They always bore you at some point, myself included. My stuff, I'm sure, bores people at certain points, but I cannot say that about Cain's best stuff. Even his longer novels, like Mildred Pierce, the pages turn themselves. So it's a really hard comparison, Tim, but for my money, Chandler, he's the guy who takes the prose to another level. And because I'm a writer, and so that is important for me.
It's been a while since I read the Cain novels, and I recall that from what I remember, he doesn't use much in the way of similes as Chandler would do, right?
No way.
That's more poetic, and he's not going for the poetic.
No, and thank you for that question or that comment, because that helps me to further elucidate why Chandler didn't care for Cain. He pretended, although he was an admirer in some respect, I think. I know what it was. It's because people used to lump them together, and Chandler resented that because Cain was first on the scene. He came out with the Postman Always Rings Twice in 1934, and this is when Chandler's just breaking into the pulps. He's writing his first, second, third story at this point for Black Mask. And then 1935, this serialized version of Double Indemnity in Liberty magazine. So his big 1-2 punch, I would argue, those are his two great ones for my money, and then Mildred Pierce and then Serenade. But his 1-2 punch, Chandler was just, he was just learning how to write, basically. And then he got his stuff published, and the people were automatically lumping him together. Dashiell Hammett, Chandler had no problem with that. But then with Cain, and he thought, well, that's going a bit too far, because as we've described, he uses a very plain language, Cain, and it's not fancied up. There's very little wit. I mean, the plots are extremely, cunning and witty, but wit in the sense of wordplay and whatnot, there's none of that in Cain. And yeah, there's no idealism. Chandler was big on a little bit of idealism. That's why he said that the Philip Marlowe character, who was this sort of idealized version of a PI, a chivalrous version of your private investigator. He didn't like Cain for that reason either. That you have to have a certain amount of idealism, and there's none of that in any of the Cain characters. They're cynical. They're looking out for number one. They're willing to kill to get whatever they need done, whatever they want. And it's pure lust and murder, and Chandler objected to that a little bit, but he did a great job with his book, Mr. Cain's book.
It was easier for me to follow the plot in a Cain novel than it is Chandler.
Oh yeah, I mean the film simplifies the plot quite a bit, because the ending, the last fifth of the book gets a little bit complicated, and I don't even want to get into it, to tell you the truth. We'll just stick with the film, but there's a lot of crossing and double crossing and triple crossing, and there are other characters involved. There's the stepdaughter of Phyllis Dietrichson, and there's her boyfriend, a fellow by the name of Nino Zaschetti, an Italian kid, and it gets a little bit complicated. The book also doesn't highlight the character of Barton Keyes as much as Wilder and Chandler decided to do, and this is the role played by Edward G. Robinson, a great role. They talk about in other roles, Little Caesar and all this kind of thing. I think this was his greatest role. I haven't seen all his films, but he just did a fantastic job. And this is the guy who has to investigate claims that are fishy, right? And from the very beginning, he thinks this whole murder that has been orchestrated by one of his salesmen, this Walter Neff, although he doesn't know it, and orchestrated by him and this Phyllis. He thinks there's something not kosher going on here, and that's a large part of the movie version. This relationship between Keyes and Neff, and throughout there's like a running gag where this Barton Keyes is always looking for a match, and then Walter, he always has a match available, and it's one of these kitchen matches, and he strikes his thumbnail on it and it lights, and he always comes up with a light for Keyes. This happens 3 times or so in the film, and then there's a very poignant ending. It's when everything hits the fan, and Phyllis actually shoots Neff, and he goes back to the office, and he's on the dictaphone there in his office telling Keyes all about how he had murdered, along with Phyllis, this Mr. Dietrichson. And then while he's talking on the dictaphone, Keyes is listening outside. The idea was that he wanted to give Keyes the story and then cut out for the Mexican border, make it across, and maybe be out of harm's way. Keyes is listening. He comes in at a certain point, and then he says, Walter, boy, this little confrontation. And then Walter says, hey, I'm going to leave, and Keyes says, I'm going to call the cops.
And I remember the line. He says, Walter, you're all washed up.
You're all good one. Yeah, you're all washed up. And he says, no, I'm not. I'm off to the Mexican border. Just give me time to get across the border. What about it? For old time's sake. And he said, Walter, you're not going to make it to the elevator, because he's shot in the chest. And he goes to the elevator. He doesn't make it. He topples over. Keyes comes to him, and They have a little exchange there at the end, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. And Fred McMurray, playing the character of Walter Neff, he says, "You know why you couldn't figure this one, Keyes?" Because he'd been stymied, Keyes, the whole time. He couldn't figure it out. He said, "You know why you couldn't figure this one, Keyes? I'll tell you. Because the guy you were looking for was too close, right across the desk from you." And then Edward G. Robinson says, "Closer than that, Walter." And then Walter Neff says, "I love you too." And then he's looking for a cigarette. You know, you're dying. That's what you do in the 40s. You get a last smoke, right? Looking for a cigarette, he sticks it in his mouth. Then he's looking for a match. And then Edward G. Robinson comes up with the kitchen match and does the striking of it on his thumbnail routine and lights the match for Walter. It had been the reverse the whole time throughout the film, right? Walter always lighting his match. It's a very touching, poignant end. And I would have only changed. Yeah.
Was that ending only in the screenplay and not in the original novel?
That was not at all in the original novel. And in fact, Cain was very, as opposed to a lot of authors when they see their work on the screen, he was very pleased with the end result. Although they changed quite a bit, at least in the second half of the novel, of the film they did, that was not in it. And he said the ending was better than his ending, okay? We can maybe get into the ending of the novel, but he said this was better. And he also said the gimmick with the dictaphone was great because, as I said at the beginning, maybe I didn't say it, I didn't explain it completely, but Neff comes into the office in the first frames of the film and he's been shot already, right? So we're seeing the end of the film at the beginning, as it were. He's shot, he goes to the dictaphone, he's going to confess everything to Keyes, and that's when we have this flashback and we go through the story, him telling in a voiceover, classic film noir again, right? The voiceover of, and the flashback of what happened to lead him to this point where he's been shot. And Cain said that was great with the dictaphone, that if he had thought of that, he would have put that in, right? So the very beginning and the very end of the film, he loved, and he loved the middle part too. So yeah, he was quite pleased with it. I would say one last thing though, just a little, as a writer, where they end with the line, "I love you too." I would have stopped at "closer than that, Walter." I would have stopped there. Because Walter Neff says "I love you" in the film already. He says it earlier on. It's when Keyes goes on kind of a tirade and he goes, "Yeah, I love you too," kind of like that. But they are very close. It's one of the first bromance films without it being explicit. So I think it sets up perfectly this exchange without the "I love you too." I'll read it again. "You know why you couldn't figure this one, Keyes? I'll tell you. Because the guy you were looking for was too close, right across the desk from you. Closer than that, Walter." And then you have the cigarette. That would have been better than "I love you too." I think so. So even more pregnant, right? Stopping it there. We get it. We get it that they love each other. You don't have to say it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And did you see in your version of the script, did you see the alternate ending? Did they give you the alternate ending in the script?
Not that I know of. I don't recall.
Okay, good, because this is maybe where you would have profited from reading the one online, and I'm looking at it right now. They have an alternate ending.
Huh.
And yeah, and the alternate ending is, let me see if I can bring it up. Yeah, here it is. So, "I love you too," says Neff. Neff fumbles for the handkerchief, and Keyes' pocket pulls it out and clumsily wipes his face with it. Then, clutching the handkerchief against his shoulder, he speaks to Keyes for the last time. Okay? So no cigarette, right? No cool cigarette lighting scene. Neff says, "At the end of that trolley line, just as I get off, you be there to say goodbye. Will you, Keyes?" Because Keyes had said earlier, yeah, when two people commit a murder, they're in it forever. They're till the end of the line, the trolley to the end of the line to the cemetery. So he's kind of paraphrasing Keyes here. And that's not the end of the film, though. He says, "You'll be there to say goodbye, will you, Keyes, when I get to the end of the trolley line?" And then we have 1, 2, 3, 2.5 pages where they show Walter Neff going to the gas chamber. Is it San Quentin? And Keyes is one of the witnesses, and they take you through, the whole thing, from beginning to end. The chaplain comes in, the witnesses, and Billy Wilder. He said that this is one of, he really worked hard on this scene. He just one of his best scenes he's ever filmed, but then he cut it because he figured, it's better to end it where he ended it, and I think there's no question about that. And that old adage, kill your darlings. Your art can only profit. Kill those scenes you think are so wonderful if they don't contribute to the whole in a way that,
I think I recall in the movie version of The Postman Always Rings Twice, they have the whole court case scene at the end and showing the villains brought to justice. And they go extensively into that kind of scene of punishment, crime and punishment there in the Postman Always Rings Twice, although I don't know if that's in the original novel.
It is, indeed. Like I said, that was his main concern, the love rack. And he wanted to show how the murder and how it took place is always interesting with Cain. He goes into detail how they plan it, how they pull it off, how certain mishaps occur, the unexpected occurs. That's like a great. That's what Cain does beautifully in this one as well, where. Oh, it's just too much to go into the story at this point. I hope people have seen the movie or read the novel, but at a certain point, this Walter Neff, he's masquerading as the husband who they've already killed. He's on crutches, and they've already killed the husband, and he's masquerading as him, and he goes to the back of the train where he's going to jump off, and then they're, like he's been lost on the train, and then they're going to haul the dead body of the husband on the tracks, and then they're going to make off. Well, he goes to the back, the last car, the caboose, I guess, the observation platform, to smoke a cigar, ostensibly. And that's where he's going to jump off after the train gets going. It's going about 15 miles an hour. It's going through the LA city now, so you don't get up to speed quite. And he's going to jump off. And there's a guy sitting out there. Uh-oh. What now? There's a guy sitting out there. He's sitting out there smoking a cigar. It's night too, right? So they can't really identify him very well. He's got his fedora pulled down low. He's wearing glasses like the dead husband, dead now. He's got to get this guy out of here. He's only got 5 or 6 minutes because that's where Phyllis is waiting down the track to meet him, and they'll carry the body onto the track and then take off. Well, he's got to get rid of the guy. Well, this is nice. Cain always does this. It's like, okay, good. The murder plot is, ingenious enough, but then there's always going to be a fly in the ointment, and that's nice. That's nice for the reader. It really heightens the suspense. And he does get rid of the guy finally. He says, "Oh my goodness, I'd like to smoke a cigar too." He goes, "Well, take one of mine." He goes, "Oh, well, I have my own cigars. They're in my. I can't. With these crutches, it's so difficult." "Hey, don't worry, I'll go back and get them." Right. So he leaves, and then he jumps off the end of the train. So these kind of things. Cain's very good at that. And one thing he didn't think of, which I thought was a good little ploy, which Chandler and Wilder did think of, is once they have done this thing of depositing the dead body on the tracks, it looks like they've perpetrated it without a hitch. They get into their car and they're going to drive back. And they want to get back as quickly as possible so that they can make a phone call or show themselves, or she has to go and buy some cold cream at a late night drugstore or something. So they can have alibis, right? So they got to get out of there. So it's not like if the car doesn't start, then they can just walk somewhere eventually or catch a bus. Now they got to get back home quick. Well, Wilder and Chandler put the scene in where they start the car and it won't start. It's like one of these things. It won't start. And you're nervous for them, right? I remember that scene, watching it. I remember reading it right now. You're like, oh my goodness. So, and then they get it started finally, I guess the battery was low or something. They figure it out. That wasn't in the book. So those little movie touches, right, which are nice to read, like, aha, and that added to it quite a lot. Well, not quite a lot, but these touches taken all together, they added to the story quite a lot, I would argue. So,
as long as we're on the subject of Cain, we might as well address his other two famous novels.
sure.
Postman Always Rings Twice, Mildred Pierce. Anything this, which do you prefer, Double Indemnity or Postman Always Rings Twice, as far as the novel?
I like Double Indemnity. It's just even more unputdownable than The Postman Always Rings Twice. And I like the look into the insurance business. That's interesting for me. I like these authors that bring me into a world that I have never even much thought about, but all of a sudden I'm interested, and they're making it very compelling. That's one definition of a great writer. He brings you into a world that you don't even care about. It's like, insurance? Are you crazy? But then he brings you into it via this murder and this sordid little love story, and you're hooked. And he does that too with the legal system. And in The Postman Always Rings Twice, he does that too. And I think, is there also an insurance policy in that one, involved in that one? I think there is. Yes, I think there is as well. But yeah, but they're both great. One thing I want to say before we sign off, we're coming to the end of our hour. But another thing that the movie version did better than the book is that there are a couple implausibilities in the book, I have to say. And one was, I sigh because I have to sort of tell viewers what more of the plot, but leave it aside. There's this one scene where Neff is going to have to get into the back of the car that is being driven by Phyllis. She's driving her husband, who has broken his foot, to the train station, and the idea is they're going to kill him, right? Before he can get on the train, then Neff's going to assume his identity and jump off, and they're going to put his body on the railroad tracks. Okay, I think we kind of get it. How she gets Neff into the back of their car without the husband knowing in Cain is extremely implausible. What happens is she pulls out, she's got her husband in the car, broken foot and all, and they drive a bit, and then she stops, and she says, "Oh, I forgot my pocketbook," with her money, I guess. She's got her money there. "I forgot my pocketbook." I guess she's going to need some money to park or to get out of the parking lot. I don't know exactly, but anyway, she needs her pocketbook, and her husband says, "Oh, forget it. We got to catch a train. Are you crazy? Come on, keep going." And she argues and she pouts under instructions from Walter Neff. And he said, just stonewall him, say, "I want my pocketbook. My lipstick's in it. Just play like the helpless woman, and he'll go back and get it for you eventually." So he does. And she doesn't even back up the car. He just gets out, crutches and all, and walks, I don't know, it goes about 50 yards back to the house, 100 yards back to the house. In the meantime, Neff has been hiding behind a tree. This is at night, right? So it's somewhat plausible. And then he gets into the back of the car, lies down, right? So then later on in a dark street, he can reach up and break the guy's neck, which is how he kills him. But that this guy with crutches would then go back, drive the car back. What's with it? I don't get it. Wilder and Chandler apparently didn't buy this version, and that what they did is they just had Neff come, at an appointed time just before Phyllis and her husband got into the car. They had Neff sneak into the garage and sneak into the back of the car. Beautiful. That's it. What's with this hard to believe thing about get my pocketbook, my lipstick in it? Didn't work for me. And then the other thing that they didn't include in the film, which was also very implausible, is they have this Phyllis at one point. Neff has constructed this harness to be able to carry the dead body, and they're supposed to both carry it, but he finds, because he's a little bit late because of this fellow who had been holding him up on the observation platform, Phyllis has decided just to carry the body herself. She's a standard sized woman, but this guy's like a 200-pound guy, and she's got him on her back, and it's like this ghostly scene of her, her silhouette going across the train tracks with this body, the head of the husband lolling next to hers, and she's carrying this thing. Whew. I think Cain wrote that just because it was so eerie. He wanted to have that eerie scene, but it's implausible. She wouldn't be able to haul a guy like that. Even you do have a harness. But he makes her out to be a devil incarnate, this Phyllis, much worse than the Barbara Stanwyck figure, much worse. And she's killed other people in the past, as I've mentioned, and yeah. So.
Okay, anything to say about Mildred Pierce?
Sorry, yeah, I got off the track. Mildred Pierce is fantastic, and
should we devote a separate session to Postman and or Mildred Pierce, or have we kind of covered that terrain here?
I don't know. I mean, I would not mind discussing either of them. They could always bear a rereading from my point of view, and maybe leave the movies aside this time. This would be this is a beautiful idea on your part, Tim. This is a beautiful segue from Chandler into Cain, right? We can just do Cain now. And there's another great novel he wrote called Serenade. That's also very good. He wrote that, like, not good novellas, a Career in C sharp major, I think it was. Career in C sharp, about the opera world.
The only reservation I have on examining these books by Cain separately is they're very thin, short, very concisely plotted books. So there's not as much beef on them as there would be in a Chandler novel. I don't know if we can, they're so short but sweet. Are we able to devote a whole separate hour to Postman, for example?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Yeah, sure.
And let's see if I'm not sure if I can get it on my end, but maybe we can get the movie script of Postman as well as the novel.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it one time with John Garfield and Lana Turner. I wasn't so impressed, to tell you the truth. I don't know why. So I wouldn't want to get on that topic and only have nasty things to say about it. I think the film with Nicholson and Jessica Lange was very good. I think it might.
Do you have a copy of Postman on your bookshelf?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I have the main Cain stuff. Yeah.
Let's do Postman next week.
Let's do Postman next week, and because that's what kicked off Cain's career, and it's what he's usually identified with. It seems to me even more so than Double Indemnity, because Double Indemnity has been appropriated by Billy Wilder in the meantime because of the great film he made with it, and to the detriment of Chandler too, because Chandler is rarely mentioned. They always think of Billy Wilder. They don't know about Chandler, though. Billy Wilder would mention him. In fact, he said one time, I have a biography on him here. I read it. He said that the two people that people always wanted to know about with whom he worked, the two were Marilyn Monroe and, take it away,
Raymond Chandler.
Raymond Chandler. So people in the know, right, cineasts and whatnot, and lovers of fine, hard-boiled fiction, they knew, they were clued in, but most of the world doesn't. And it's Wilder and Double Indemnity and film noir and James M. Cain, but Chandler gets lost, I think, a little bit in that. So, yeah, you did a good job of helping bring his name back into the mix, Tim. Very good. And yeah. So let's do Mr. Cain. Nice segue into Mr. Cain at this point.
Sounds good. So
another Los Angeles writer, although he, by way of Maryland, so maybe half Los Angeles writer.
And one more difference between Chandler and Cain that I've recognized, well, although I haven't read Cain in a while, I kind of been speaking from memory here. I don't think he has a PI. He doesn't have a detective who's doing the gumshoe work. He doesn't have a personality there doing that, like Philip Marlowe or Sam Spade. Is that not right?
That's right. Yeah. The closest thing he has to that in Double Indemnity is Barton Keyes, of course.
But he's not a PI.
Yeah, but he's an insurance investigator, and they're bloodhounds. They're as dogged as any PI or cop, because they have a lot of money to lose. There's a lot of money on the line here. So I think I think Cain even wrote that. Yeah, Cain in Double Indemnity said the great crime cases in American history are not on the police blotter. They're in the files of insurance companies.
Okay.
They're the ones who really they go to town on trying to catch the criminal and getting involved in the nitty-gritty details of how a crime might have been perpetrated so that they can prove it in court and not have to pay out the claim.
Good. That's a good point.
Because sometimes cops, my understanding of it is, if they get a fairly reasonable explanation of who committed the murder, if they get a suspect who is a fairly plausible one, they'll sometimes hang the rap on him or her and just leave it at that. They're not losing any money. They're not losing 100,000, which was
Right.
which is at least $1 million back then in the 40s. So very close with Barton Keyes, very close to a PI, but not in the formal Philip Marlowe sense.
All right, Kev. So that's all for today.
Good.
We'll be reading Postman Always Rings Twice. I don't think I have a copy in my bookshelf. I'll have to buy one at the local Barnes and Noble. I think last time I checked a month or two ago, looking through Chandler. The interesting thing is when you go to the mystery section in a bookstore, Chandler and Cain are right next to each other.
By virtue of their place in the alphabet.
Correct. CH and CA. And so when I was checking out the Chandler books to get my copies for these sessions we were having, I saw the Cain books there. And I think I saw a compilation of all three, Double Indemnity, Postman, and Mildred Pierce, all in one volume. So I'll see if I can get that. If not, we'll at least have your expertise on Postman.
Well, can't you go to the library? They certainly have it at the library.
Oh, okay. Local Camarillo Library.
Yeah, go to the library, man. Yeah, I advise that in general. You don't have to, fork over all that money. Yeah.
All right.
But and I want to say one last thing. I always have one little coda I'd like to add. There's one part of the film that bothered me, okay? So far, we've been praising it to the high heavens. And this is part of the film that you wouldn't read in the book nor in the screenplay. You have to have seen the film. And they have little excerpts on YouTube. I went back to check my memory, and it checked out. There's a scene where Keyes visits Walter Huff late at night, and he's hot on the scent of
Walter Neff.
What did I say? Walter Huff? Oh, Huff is his name in the novel. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they changed it. Walter Neff, and he goes to visit Keyes. Wants to talk. Excuse me. Keyes goes to visit Neff late at night in his apartment house. He wants to talk about the case. Obviously, doesn't know Walter has committed the crime, so he's confiding in him. And when he is in there, Phyllis decides, when he's in the apartment of Neff, Phyllis decides to come by. She wants to talk to him because they don't want a telephone, right? There might be a tracer on their telephone calls and whatnot. So she comes unexpectedly, and she hears that there's someone in the apartment with Neff. So she's about to knock when she stops. That's another good Billy Wilder Chandler thing. It's like the car not starting. She's about to knock. It's like, oh, don't do that. See, even though they are murderers, you're still kind of on their side, if only that you want the suspense to continue, right? That's the fun of it. I mean, you don't, yeah. So she doesn't, then she kind of, doesn't know what to do. And she kind of just presses herself up against the wall, kind of unclear as to what her next move should be. And then right then the door opens and Keyes is leaving. and the door opens, and she hides behind the door, right? And Neff doesn't know she's there. So he opens the door, and he's saying goodbye to Keyes, a few last words as Keyes makes his way to the elevator in the other direction. You know, so they got the door, and here's Phyllis and Neff, and then Keyes. And then at one point, she kind of gives it a little tug, right? So he can, because he's got his hand on the knob. So he kind of knows not to do anything. Maybe he knew that she was coming. I'm not sure, but anyway, to let him know, so he doesn't swing the door closed, and all of a sudden she's standing there in the hallway, and Keyes is looking at her, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What's my problem with that? Well, since when do doors in apartment houses open outwardly? They open inwardly. And I think this was just something that came up for this cool little scene. Did doors in apartment houses open outwardly even in the 1940s? I don't think so. You go down the corridor, you're going to be getting hit by doors opening all the time. They open inwardly. When you open the front door to your house, to an apartment, you pull the door open.
I got you.
So that always bothered me. And I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but I'm sure they have. I'm not the first one to utter this criticism, but I haven't heard anyone else, and that bothered me. It's like that's such a contrivance just to have a cool little scene.
All
but
right.
maybe they opened outward back then. Probably, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so brazen as to do that when everyone is looking at this, and saying, well, they don't open outwardly. So they must have opened outwardly in certain apartment houses in Los Angeles back in the 1940s. Okay.
Right, Kev.
Bothers me.
An interesting pet peeve there.
Indeed.
All right. We'll see you next week for Postman Always Rings Twice.
Looking forward to it, Tim. Well done. Good.
Thanks, Kev.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.